Great. Welcome to this session on self-supply. My name is John Butterworth. I'm from IRC, and I'm welcoming you to this session in the name of the 10 co-organizers of the session. You can find details about all those organizers in the Pathable platform where you join this meeting. Just a few technical details to start us off. We have a chat box here in the Pathable platform. And as a first step, we invite you to write your name and organization there so we can see who's joined us for the session. Later on, we'll be using that chat box for interaction through the session. And if you want to speak during the session, and we hope many of you do, you'll need to be signed into your Zoom account. And there you can raise your hand so that we'll open the microphone for you. So let us start with the content of this session about self-supply's potential for increased resilience and water security. Self-supply, it's a mechanism of households taking charge of their water provisioning. It's a rural and urban coping mechanism, often in response to inadequate supply. We're going to be building on an earlier session on self-supply in Asia on Monday, where we talked about the 1 billion people that might be involved there in self-supply, and examples of leadership to support and improve this form of service provision for safely managed services. We've organized this session for you to share experiences and recommendations of how self-supply as a complementary solution can strengthen resilience. We're going to introduce you to the topic of self-supply, illuminate some case studies, and hear from you. So without any more ado, let's hear from Sally Sutton, a woman with 4 decades of experience on this topic and who's just written a book about it. She's being interviewed here by Kirsten Dennert from Ask for Water, and Kirsten is going to be our facilitator for this session.
You know, you've just written this fantastic book on self-supply, which is a delight to read and full of interesting material. But I want to ask you a kind of personal question, and that's, what's your most memorable observation of self-supply or observations of self-supply?
That's a difficult one, but because the problem is there are so many, but I think it's partly just the scale of it. It's the fact that you come across it everywhere in the world. I'm just as likely to find it in the United States or in Ireland as I am in Zambia or Indonesia. So it's more of an amalgam rather than a particular incident or a particular place.
Yeah, no, thanks. The scale, the fact that it's almost ubiquitous.
Yes, and I think, there are some countries about which we don't know because there's no data for them, such as China and Russia to some degree, but I think that they too probably exhibit very much the same characteristics.
Yeah, okay. And kind of, for those of us here today who are not so familiar with what self-supply is, how would you describe it in a nutshell? What is it?
Well, it's basically the self-financing of the provision of any service. So it could be electricity, or it could be sanitation, or in the case of most of the book, it's talking mainly about water, but with a little bit of reference also to sanitation. So it's basically where people are providing their own supply. And because they're usually doing it from only within their own means, it tends to happen in small steps. So you progress up a sort of ladder of service delivery over time as the economy of the household improves.
Okay, now that's clear. And why is it so important that self-supply is considered? Why does it matter?
I think from 2 points of view. One is that so many people who at present have no alternative source, and also that they tend to value it so much themselves. So I think it has the opportunity to add considerably to the provision of water at standards which are at least basic or even safely managed. Just to add to that, I mean, I think as we're now looking more and more in the SDG aims, we're looking more and more at having on-premises supplies. And these supplies, the 1 in 7, are already on premises, and the vast majority of them are in fact improved. That doesn't mean that they haven't got plenty of scope for further improvement and upgrading, but certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, it's over half of rural and about 89% of urban self-supply, which is improved. And somewhere like South Asia, where it's very much more developed and even more people involved, nearly all of the supplies are at a level which counts as improved, but again has lots of room for further upgrading and reaching higher service levels.
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for bringing in that point about being at the home. You're really talking about people who have invested in services that are at their own premises already.
Yes, and I think particularly convenience is probably the most important stimulant to people investing in their own water supply anywhere. So it's that which is driving people to invest millions on their own, which is often among the poorest members of the society.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I mean, you're clearly very passionate about this topic, and you've spent a long time, many hours and weeks and months writing this book. And so you're an incredible book. What do you want that book to achieve?
Well, I think I really want it to achieve a level of understanding among people, because at the moment it's so not recognized as something that's important, and it has so much to offer. So I think it needs to firstly sort of get people understanding more what already exists that they've never really looked at. But then I think it also needs the development in each country of systems which support self-supply to do a better job. And that is almost totally missing worldwide. I mean, to a small degree in high-income countries, there is some level of grants or loans, but generally very little. And the regulation is almost self-regulation. It's the households who are expected to check that their water's all right, and to report if they feel that they're getting ill from the water that they've got, and so on. And in lower income countries, there's really no inventories. There's no way of knowing how many such systems there are on the ground or where they are on the ground. And until that is available, it's very difficult to plan alongside it, and to be doing planning of water supplies in a country without any knowledge of what already exists within households, and to which with which they have such a high value that they give to it, I think means that it makes it very difficult for other systems to be as sustainable as they should be. So it requires really an integrating of self-supply into the overall picture of the sector, and then working out within each sort of political and hydrogeological and cultural setting how the support to that can be most cost effectively carried out, generally alongside the community water supply systems that already exist and the support services which they depend on.
And I think we're now handing over to you, Kirsten. Are you ready to take us away as our facilitator?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, John, for the great introduction. And thanks again to Sally for giving us the time with that really fascinating interview. For this session, we've got a whole series of little nuggets of experiences from various countries on self-supply, and then we really want to open to a discussion with you in the audience. So let's come with our first nugget, first experience, and I'm going to start with Lemessa Makonta, who's got extensive experience of self-supply initiatives in Ethiopia. Lemessa, can you tell us about Ethiopia and what it's done with respect to self-supply and how far it's gone? Over to you, Lemessa.
Good. Thank you, Kirsten. Self-supply in Ethiopia actually, especially the support began in 2002 or 2003 by government, and it has gone through different phases. Pre-2007, which was like more of campaign approach, and also that showed us it was possible to reach for many households to have their own water supply. And 2007 to 2012, this duration was the time when development partners and the research institutions joined the government in documenting and researching self-supply uses and also self-supply ladders. And this ended up with self-supply policy guideline development in 2012. And since 2013, based on the policy guidelines developed by government based on research and the documentation, piloting of different aspects of self-supply, like how to engage private service providers, linkage to like microfinances or loans, and the technology. These have been piloted by different development partners. And one good thing from this one is, again, after almost 20 years, our water resource management policy was revised in 2020, last year, in which case self-supply is clearly articulated in the revised National Water Resource Management Policy. In terms of use and ladder, self-supply is being used for both domestic and productive uses. And also in terms of ladder, we can find like different ladders of self-supply from the bottom to top. And currently it is estimated like around 17 million people are using their self-supply water source in the country. Back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, Lemessa. Over a decade of experience in Ethiopia and a lot of people who are benefiting from self-supply. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch to the Asian continent now. Another very interesting case from Thailand, which involved the government as well, but took us a bit of a different direction from Ethiopia. Matthias Saladin, you went to Thailand and you documented self-supply there. Tell us about their experiences, please.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. The reason for us at RDMSN to look at Thailand was actually because it's a place where self-supply really went mainstream, about dozens of millions of people, and it was a result of a deliberate effort, mostly by government. So the key lesson I would like to highlight in this session here from that analysis is really the importance of government. And in that, I see two aspects. First of all, the importance of policy setting. We need to be in an enabling environment in terms of policies that allow for self-supply to deliver. And these policies need to be stable over quite a long time because of the large number of actors that need to align to such a policy. We're talking about several dozen government agencies and dozens to hundreds of private sector and NGOs to align to that policy. So having a simple, stable policy over a long time is important. And the second aspect I would like to highlight is the importance of government in capacity building. In Thailand, thousands of people were trained to build rainwater tanks. They call them Thai jars. And the initiative actually initially was a job creation initiative. Thousands of people were trained, and those were the people who then carried forward the initiative. So those are the highlights, the lesson I would like to highlight from that experience. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for sharing that and kind of building on this importance of government and thinking about capacity. Now, we're going to move a bit away from government to a kind of an NGO perspective. And Tara, who's moved heaven and earth to make sure she has an internet connection and can join us today. Tara, you've got some experiences from Bangladesh of self-supply done by WaterAid. So over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kirsten. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to share a bit about WaterAid's work in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a context where self-supply is really widespread, and there's over 10 million households are estimated to have their own hand pump. And some 2019 GLAS report data indicated that household investments in self-supply in Bangladesh now exceeds the amount now exceeds the tariff payments for water. So it is really an important source of water there. And the other side of this is that microfinance loans for income generating activities are commonly used in Bangladesh. So WaterAid Bangladesh has combined these two facts to partner with microfinance providers to provide water sanitation, hygiene, microfinance loans in rural households. So these are sort of a standard microfinance loan, except that a percentage of the loan can be used for installing or upgrading water or sanitation infrastructure in the household. And then the rest of the loan is a more standard microfinance loan where it's used for income generation and to pay back the loan. And then WaterAid also works to generate demand for these loans through community engagement about the importance of the benefits of improving wash infrastructure. And so far, the team tell me that they've had really good success and they're going to integrate this into more of their programs and try and scale it up. Thanks. Back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tara. And that just complements what Sally talked about self-supply being able to considerably add to services and the convenience factor of water supplies at people's homes. Okay, let's come back to the African continent. And Lera, you've got a little bit of a difficult internet connection. So if we can't hear you first time, we'll try again. Lera, you've been working in Njombe in Tanzania. And we'd like to hear about your great experiences on self-supply. Over to you.
Yes, thanks, and hello everyone. So at SHIP organization, we work on rural water supply in southern Tanzania. In 2002, we started collecting cost-effective technologies for well drilling, hand pumps, and water filters. And since then, we have trained over 150 people in manual well drilling and the local production of rope pumps. And the trainings involve both technical and business aspects. So some results up to date are that there are over 40 small and medium scale well drilling and pump companies operating in this region, and more than 50,000 rope pumps have been sold, of which 10,000 are for self-supply. And the main lessons learned during these years are that, one, to scale up self-supply, it is essential to build a commercial supply chain of products and services by pushing both offer and demand. Two, to build a supply chain, good quality of products and services is essential, as each product serves as a promotion object. And three, good quality requires coaching of entrepreneurs during 1 to 3 years. And for example, at SHIPO, we monitor the work of the entrepreneurs after the training, and we have a certification program which we implement together with the state actor, which in the case of Tanzania is the Water Institute. Thanks, and back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Lera. Thanks a lot. And really getting deeper into this whole issue of private sector and how it works from Tanzania. Thanks a lot, Henk, who's just pointed out that not everybody may be aware of how the Pathable platform works completely. So if you're on your kind of browser and go into this chat box, there's a kind of set of different tabs, chats, polls, and files. As you go into the chat, you're able to write, ask questions, make comments, argue with us, contradict. So please feel very free to put your comments there. I think we have quite a few people here who know a lot about self-supply already, others who are new to the topic. So please feel free to have a very lively discussion in that chat. And now I'm going to kind of ask Rainer, we've got a really nice little video, another nugget from Zambia. Could I hand over to you to play that lovely little film that was prepared for us?
My name is Rick Hane from Jacana Smart Center in Zambia. The session is about self-supply and water security for all. Let me make a statement. I believe we can provide more than 50% of the SDC 6 target group with family-owned water supply, but without spending more than community supply, and with a clear ownership and the possibility to create income with water. How did we do that in Zambia? First, we created a capacity for manual drilling, making affordable pumps, and we set up supply chains. Each family-owned pump provides water to 50 neighbors as well, for free. This way we already reached 64,000 people in 4 years. Pumps are very well maintained because they generate an income, and there's no issue about ownership. We subsidize these pumps often for $20 per person, just like community pumps. The subsidized pumps create a market for self-supply. 30% of all the pumps that we have installed are actually fully paid by the owner. There was no subsidy involved. That's the story very quickly from Zambia. Thank you.
Oh, big thanks to Rick Hannon for preparing that for us today, and such a clear overview of what's happening in Zambia, and particularly the contribution to the SDGs. 64,000 people that have improved sources thanks to this approach. And again, complementing Sally's point about self-supply really contributing towards access to water for everyone, improved access. Now we've got two more speakers looking at kind of different aspects of self-supply, and human rights and leave no one behind are huge political drivers, global political drivers at the moment. Jenny Gronwell from Seaweed, you've been working on issues of human rights and groundwater for over a decade now. Please, can you share some light shed some light on human rights issues, or even concerns that you might have around self-supply? Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you. Yes, I was so fascinated by that film from Zambia. I hadn't seen it before. Thank you for that. We're talking self-supply. We're talking groundwater most of the time. And this dependence on groundwater, it really is increasing around the world, and not least in urban areas. We might think that self-supply is mainly for rural areas, but in fact is something that is growing in importance in urban and peri-urban areas as well. And there is an important connection here, whether we are talking rural or urban. There is an important connection between self-supply, groundwater, and the human rights to water and sanitation, as they are defined in the international human rights law, because this points to self-supply, self-provision being the norm. And only as a last resort, if households cannot reasonably be expected to provide for themselves, must the state go in and directly distribute water. And there is this general concern among some of us who work with this and others that the water quality and the potability is not really looked after when people are providing themselves with drinking water. So how is the user, the household, to know that the drinking water is safe? Well, again, we have a role for the state here. The state is to ensure the right to adequate physical and mental health and to leave no one behind. And the state, we recommend, must give clear and user-friendly advice on treatment and point source protection, for instance. And this is something that Kirsten and I have developed in an article that we refer to. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Lovely. Always lovely to hear you and your reflections on this key issue. Now, last but not least, we're going to come to Petra Schmitter of the World Bank, IMI. And we're going to kind of, with you coming at the end, but as I said, last but not least, is kind of move a little bit beyond drinking water into agriculture, water for agriculture. So enlighten us on self-supply in agriculture, irrigation. Tell us a bit more here.
Thanks, Kirsten. And there are really two interesting lessons that we learned from the irrigation sector. First, farmer supply for agriculture, which we also call farmer-led irrigation development, is often more widespread than government-financed irrigation systems. The second lesson, as also was mentioned in the Zambia nugget, when farmers actually involved in self-supply, near or at their homesteads, it meets not only domestic needs, but also those of livestock, and improves nutrition and income, and really enables a reinvestment in better water infrastructure. So if we come back to the Ethiopia nugget, we saw that during COVID-19, the households who actually invested in self-supply at their homesteads were less affected by market disruptions and reported access to still nutritious food compared to those households that didn't. And at the same time, the households with self-supply also received increased water requests for wash purposes from their neighbors. So ultimately, self-supply for wash in agriculture has a lot of similarities, and bridging these with accelerate or benefits not only to SDG 6, but also SDG 2 and many others, and help tackle the issues on operation and maintenance that we see in both sectors. So lastly, there is a huge potential for cross-sectoral collaboration to unlock not only the human right to water services for domestic use, but also the right to build resilience for food more holistically.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Petra, and for helping us to break out of WASH and break into working collaboratively with your sector and with the irrigation food security sector. Great. We have a number of questions coming in. I'm going to ask some of those questions to the panel, and please put your reflections, questions, ideas in the Pathable chat, because we really want to have a bit of a dialogue as much as possible with you. So feel free to say whatever you want. So a number of great questions here. I'm going to pick a question. I think I'm going to put this question to you, Lemessa, with your great experience in Ethiopia, and it's around water quality. Trying to find the question. Yeah, sorry. A question from Barbara Schreiner. I'm trying to see who wrote the question. Barbara Schreiner asks, how does one ensure that the water quality is okay under a self-supply scenario? So over to you, Lemessa, and if anybody else wants to speak from the panel, please just put your hand up.
Good, thank you. Well, those researches conducted at different times on self-supply, like with water quality, show like different ranges of fecal contamination. That's true, but there are different options to improve the water quality. One is through improving the construction or improving the protection as a source. And the second one is household water treatment, like improving water quality or ensuring water quality at point of uses. Otherwise, one of like the limitation of the self-supply is still water quality, but by adding these two approaches, improving protection and ensuring water quality at point of source, point of use, using household water treatments are some of the ways of improving water quality.
That's great. Thanks a lot. And I see Jenny's got her hand up. So Jenny, you want to add on this?
Yes, there are various different ways, of course, and to just supplement what Lemessa said, I remember my own father sending in water tests regularly to ensure that our water was potable from the well. And this is something that authorities in countries such as Sweden and the US does, but the cost of those tests are of course falling on the household and the user of the water, and those costs they're not small, because we're talking quite advanced tests. But for very many, what remains is often to do the point of use treatment. And that's why the awareness, the knowledge, the education, and the recommendations from different authorities, NGOs, and so on, all of us are very, very important to just raise this awareness to ensure that if you self-provide, you are also in charge of ensuring yourself that the water is safe. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks very much. A question here from Simon Toole, which I'm going to put to Tara, kind of reflecting on Bangladesh. Does self-supply imply absolution of government from water provision? Jenny's talked about this, but let's hear from WaterAid as well. Yeah, what's your experience coming in to Bangladesh to self-supply? Does it absolve government completely? Over to you, Tara.
Thanks, Kirsten. I won't put my video on because it's a bit unstable. I mean, that's a very difficult question. And I don't want to reply too much on behalf of the Bangladesh team. From what I understand, they always try and work in partnership with the local government, and especially around the water quality. That's something that they'd really like to see more of the local government taking responsibility for monitoring water quality and raising awareness about water quality. And it is a bit of a concern that didn't seem to be very much of the dialogue that they've had so far with the local government. It didn't seem to be so much focused around the water quality. So it's something that they're planning to raise as they take this pilot forward and expand it out to be a larger bit of work. So sorry, not a very clear answer to that. I think it's a really difficult question. So I'll send it back to you, Kirsten.
Yeah, thanks. It is a difficult question, and maybe we can kind of come back to it in the discussion a little bit later. Let's go to a really practical question, which I'm going to put to you, Lara, because you've been supporting private sector with manual drilling. And could you tell us, is there any information in a database about the drilled wells that have been done in Tanzania, looking at improving the mapping, improving future information? But yeah, question to you, Lara.
Sorry, Kirsten, I couldn't hear the question properly.
Sorry, maybe I was mumbling a bit. It's a question about
connection is a bit unstable.
Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's fine.
Okay, great. Thanks. It's about database and records. So you've been supporting the private sector to drill wells in Tanzania. And is there a database of what's been constructed? If so, who has access to that information? Yeah, information on drilled wells.
Yeah, I don't know if I could. You are asking about if we have any database on the drilled wells we have from the entrepreneurs we have trained.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that is a bit of a challenge for us because this started 18 years ago, and from the previous years, in the last years, and this is a challenge for us to, and something we are showing to the government, because it's important to have the data to show to the government that the self-supply can play a role in Tanzania. So that is something as SHIBO we are struggling, but we are looking for resources to collect as many data as we can and to show the impact of self-supply in this region. I hope I answered a bit the question.
You did, thanks a lot. It wasn't always clear, so maybe you could also write us something in the Pathable chat if we couldn't always hear you 100%. Got lots of questions coming in. Some are being answered already, some of them have not been answered. A question to Jenny specifically from Henk Hulslag. You mentioned the issue of water quality and how do families know if their water is safe to drink? You talked about your own experiences, but a little bit of others. Do you think that people should be encouraged to use household water filters? And what's the role of government in all of this?
As I think I have said, I do think the government's role is to give recommendations and ensure that there is awareness and education here. But what can a household do? Well, there are those tests, of course. And now I completely lost my thoughts. So Kerstin, bring me back.
Yeah, it's basically your reflections on government, like promoting household filters. You know, should they have a really active role in as detailed as that?
They can, of course they can. And we have the role of entrepreneurs and the private sector here as well. But I would like to add that from my own experience, very many households that do self-supply with water, they don't always use it for drinking water purposes. They might go for bottled water or sachet water for their potable needs. And it all depends on their own sort of a sense of whether their water source is safe, is the taste is good, etc., etc. So there are very many different variables that you will see, and you will see in a certain community, you will have a range of different responses and practices from households depending on what they feel and what they perceive with regards to the water quality. And some of that is well-founded and some of it may be less so. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. Responding on the spot there and making the role of government clearer and clearer. I have a question that's come in here that I think I'm going to put to Sally as a starting point, Sally, and it's from Adrian Healy, who thanks us all for the great presentations and examples, but is kind of coming back to the question of resilience, the core question for this session. So he says that the presentations are clear on how self-supply can promote individual resilience and community resilience if those sources are shared. But might an emphasis on self-provision prove to be risky if water resources begin to decline as a result of overuse, or if there's no alternative source? So I'll come to you, Sally, first, and then I'll go to Petra on the same question. We can't yet hear you, Sally. Maybe you can unmute your microphone. Otherwise, I'll go to Petra next while you're clicking. So Petra, the question again, it's really about looking beyond the household accessing water and the resilience of the community, and questions around water resources. Is there a risk if there's too much emphasis on self-provision to the kind of wider water resources, and particularly pertinent for the irrigation sector, where you use much more quantities of water?
Yeah, an excellent question, a question that we get all the time. And for that, I think there are great examples on how community-based games, for example, that IFPRI does, both on groundwater and surface water, really helps community to come together, understand better actually about needs, water needs, and how they allocate it throughout the year. And you would be surprised actually of how much community action that can be created to really have a landscape approach in that self-supply. So you can actually achieve both with the necessary emphasis, of course.
Thanks very much. It seems Sally has a problem reconnecting to the microphone and speaker. So maybe, Sally, you could respond in the chat to that question. The same question around resilience of the community. Before we kind of continue the questions, we actually have a poll here. So I'm going to hand over to Rainier to kind of run our poll.
Yes, I do have a little bit of background noise here, so I hope it's okay for you. But on the screen, you can see the pathable screen. And if you go to the poll section, there's a question we'd like you to answer. And then, as you can see, some people have already given their answers. And then hopefully the result will come up, and then we'll come back to it in a few minutes. over to you again, Kirsten.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Rainier, who's in the background, the super hosting of making sure that we get things right here. I see Matthias has just mentioned that you can also respond and complement to the question that Petra just took. So over to you, Matthias.
Yes, regarding the question of Adrian regarding individual and group, I just would like to complement that actually self-supply doesn't mean individual household supply only. It is the case in many places, for example, for rainwater harvesting, but we recently came across many cases of self-supply as a group, and that seems to be particularly common, for example, in South Africa, but also in other places. So I just would like to make that point. Self-supply doesn't mean only individual. Also, as a group, if most of your resources come from that group, we still would call and qualify that as self-supply. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Matthias. That really takes care of the key question that was put in the chat by Arco van der Toon. So yeah, really super. I'm looking at, there's lots of reflections here about the importance of collecting information on the hydrogeology about wells, questions about sustainability, which we've already talked about. Mike, you asked a question about Zambia. Unfortunately, we don't have Rick here with us at the moment, but it's in relation to subsidies for self-supply. I know there have been some subsidies in Ethiopia, so maybe I'll come to Lamesa to ask you if you can share some of your insights on self-supply subsidies. And if anybody else in the team has reflections on that, just put your hand up. So over to you first of all, Lamesa.
Thank you, Kirsten. Despite having the national self-supply policy guidelines, there is still implementation disparity. When I say implementation, the way government is supporting household self-supply and the way development partners are supporting household water supply is not still well aligned. You can see variations here and there. But in the policy, it is clearly indicated if it is household level, then they can get only technical support or advice from government or from development partners. And if it is like a group self-supply, which needs at least 10 households to come together, they are eligible for like up to 50% subsidy. And this subsidy is mainly for industrial products like pumps, cements, and iron bar. This is the situation we are in. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lamesa. And Henk, you also can respond, I think, also from Zambia on this issue of subsidies.
Yes, hello.
I can hear you loud and clear, Henk.
So I saw the question on Zambia, whether providing water to 15 families is still self-supply and how far, what is the subsidy? In the case of Zambia, what the Yakana organization does is they subsidize a well for about 70 to 80% of the total cost, which is, a lot. It may be less in the future, but until now it's about 70%. But the logic is that if it is installed at a family, the family will take care for the maintenance, because the condition of this the subsidy is that they make a plan for income generation with the water. So the income generation of the water makes sure that the family takes care of the operation and maintenance. And that has proven to work very, very well. Is that the answer to the question?
I think you've answered that loud and clear. Thanks very much, Henk. There's a kind of, and more questions in relation to household water treatment. Clearly, water quality, water treatment is a key concern. John Butterworth, I wonder if you've got any reflections on what you've seen about water treatment and point of use, and what research that you know about in that area. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Kirsten. You put me on the spot. I was busy chatting with some of our participants here. Point of use water treatment. Well, I mean, there's a lot of skeptics about it, right? A lot of organizations have been disappointed with that it's not lived up to potential. And yeah, it's not become yet a mainstream approach amongst many of the organizations working in our sector. And there's a lot of evidence behind that. At the same time, it's what I would rely on, and it's what I did rely on living in Ethiopia for a few years. You can make it work. So I think there's still, you know, there's lots of potential there. There's new technologies. There's a lot of options available. Those are nicely summarized in the book written by Sally. So the potential is there. At the same time, we know that just like self-supplied technologies to get water out of the ground, there's not a lot of support for the markets that make household water treatment technologies possible and scalable. So there's really gaps in the enabling environment for these kind of markets to develop and to be sustained. I remember working with, you know, a couple of different companies trying to set up these kind of operations in Ethiopia. It's really, really difficult to get some of these products licensed and sold at scale, and something we can, yeah, there's scope for a lot more work on, has potential.
Thank you. Thanks very much for responding on the very sharp spot to that question. There's so many questions coming in, it's hard to follow them all. Rainier, how's the poll doing? Blimey, oh, that's great. So we've still got over 60 people on the session, and I hope that all of you have put something into the poll, into our question. So what is needed for self-supply to help reach universal access to water, particularly in rural areas? What stands out massively is, oh wow, it's moving again, support, environment, enabling, capacity building, understanding stakeholders, advocacy, and households. Those are the real issues that stand out. Interestingly, finance is quite small. It's possibly taken for granted that finance is there, but at least it's also been mentioned. Training, links to capacity, research, a lot of really interesting issues, understanding. So really a lot about learning, and that's one of the things we've tried to do with this session, is to share the learning. Great. We'll take that away as a group. And just to say, you know, this session, as you see, is a group of people who are really committed to self-supply, trying to understand self-supply, support it. And we're really keen to kind of grow in numbers and link out to people who are thinking about self-supply, reflecting on it, questioning it. So please feel free to contact any of the people who've spoken on the panel afterwards. Make contact, reach out, and let's keep, you know, moving forward in our understanding of self-supply so that it can reach its potential. Right, questions. I noted a question here which I think would be great to ask to particularly to Matthias and Lemessa. It's a question from Simon Too again, and it's about maintenance and preventative maintenance. And maybe can you tell us your experiences about maintenance and repair of self-supply systems? So first of all to Matthias and then to Lemessa.
Yes, maintenance is a key issue. Drawing here on my experience from Thailand, but also in Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, really the responsibility of maintenance is to the households. But if we have these capacities, local capacity, I'm talking about local artisans and small entrepreneurs who live close to the households, really those are the people who can provide these services, and they want to provide them. So if you have a driller, a pump mechanic close to your house, those will be people who take care of your pump, of your solar panel, or whatever else you need for maintenance, and that can include preventative maintenance. Back to you.
Thank you, and over to Lamesa.
So thank you, Karsten. Yes, still the role of maintenance is it is a mandate of the household or the owner itself, and there are different situations here. One is deepening the well or cleaning the well, which is like more of civil work type maintenance, and the other one is more of lifting device maintenances, in which case could be a hand pump or rope pump. In some areas, like in Amhara region, for example, in Ethiopia, maintenance is done more by the owner themselves. This is a usual practice. Even they don't want to outsource well digging, well cleaning, and well deepening. But in some areas, like in the southern part or also in the eastern part, they outsource it, especially when they use hand pumps or rope pump. They outsource it to local or area mechanics or artisans who have trainings on these kinds of areas. But in all cases, it is a mandate of the owner.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And much clearer ownership of who that owner is, and with community sources clearly for self-supply sources. Looking at the questions here, there's a lot of questions around water treatment, water quality, also the WATA technology and nanotechnology, which uses salt to develop chlorine. Rather than kind of keep coming back to this question, I think I'd like to just ask all of the panelists that if you have reflections on WATA or more on household filters, to please write it in the chat on the Pathable board, because I'm concerned that we might be kind of repeating ourselves. But if you have anything else new to add to what's been said, please write it in the chat. I see here there's a new question, a new topic that's come in around financing, from Yusuf, who's pointing out that support is largely geared towards financing. He's not sure if he's speaking the mind of the majority of those that mentioned support like he did. I think you all talked about different aspects of support in your nuggets, but perhaps kind of going around the room again, just to say, what is the key support that you think is necessary for self-supply? Really quickly. And I'm going to start with Henk.
Sorry for clicking on and off. I think there is a few key conditions to scale self-supply. First of all, affordable technologies. Self-supply, of course, is only possible if a well is a pump, if well drilling is storage, if is affordable. So what we need first is commercial supply chains of affordable water and sanitation technologies, and that is to create that, you need the 3 T's: training, training, training. The second option to scale up self-supply, I think, is subsidizing subsidies. The poorest, it's an illusion that the poorest will pay for their own water supply. The yet unserved, 80% of the yet unserved live in rural Africa. They will never have $500 to pay for their own well and pump. So equally to the people that already have supply, they have, I think, the right to subsidy, the same kind of subsidy as any other person in the world has, which is around 10 to 25 US dollars per person in many areas. In some areas it is more difficult, but in many areas we have a subsidy of, let's say, $20 per person. You can make simple wells, a hand pump, and that will cost about $20 per person. So those would, I think, be the conditions to scale up self-supply. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Henk. So clear, always so clear. Your 3 T's, I like that very, very much. Lamesa, what would you like to add to what Henk's just said?
Not much, of course, but only one. A supply chain is really the key. In addition to affordability, quality is really another aspect which needs to be seen. Thank you.
That's great. And in this process of adding, let's come to John. What would you like to that, John, if anything?
What I'd really like is to improve my unmuting skills. Yeah, there's a great chapter in Sally's book on this. Yeah, it's a lot more than finance and subsidy, although that can be a really important bit, but particularly just getting the technical extension type support services down to large numbers of users. There's, users have a big need for advice. That's what we hear in a lot of surveys. But then there's also all the areas around, good quality research and monitoring so we can make better decisions. It's really not there at the moment.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much. And also for bringing us back to the incredible content in Sally's book. Tara, anything you'd like to add? And I'll come to Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. I'd just add, I guess, from the NGO point of view, the advocating to the government, and I think this was touched on one of the nuggets as well, about their role, whether that's in subsidizing for certain, like some of the more marginalized households, or whether that's them taking a role in monitoring the water quality. So I think that's another kind of support that we can push for. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks a lot, Jenny, and then Petra.
Yeah, from my side, and this is based on what I've seen in my own research on the ground, I really want to see governments and other actors recognizing and acknowledging self-supply as a practice that is ongoing, that is vital, that is the lifeline, that is the actual source of water for different purposes for billions of people around the world. Over.
Thank you. And Petra?
Agreeing with what everybody has said, but I do want to emphasize that there is no one silver bullet, and that likely in the different countries there is a different need of support, whether this is technology, finance, market to create the payment schemes, the knowledge, or the policies. In some countries there isn't even a policy that recognizes self-supply. So I really would like to actually advocate for looking at the enabling environment and figuring out which one to tackle where and when.
Thanks so much. And let me now come to Lere, and then we're going to close with Matthias. So Lere.
Yes, thank you. I agree with all the panelists, but yeah, just to emphasize that for me, it's super important to uncover the potential of self-supply and getting the actual data about the self-supply to see, to make people understand its potential. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And Matthias, you've got the great job of kind of pulling together your recommendations and reflections from this great session. So over to you.
Yes, quite a challenge with such a rich discussion. I'm just going to highlight a few key messages that I heard. The first one would be that self-supply is everywhere. We heard from examples from the United States, from Sweden, from Bangladesh, from Tanzania, from Zambia. So really, self-supply is not just a few hand pumps in Asia. It's everywhere. It's in literally every single country in the world. And it's also in middle and high income countries. Second point is that self-supply is big in terms of numbers. We heard global numbers about 1 in 7 households use self-supply already. And in Asia, it's actually 1 in 3. So overall, we're talking about 1 billion people around the world using that already. And it could be much more. But it's not only big in terms of number, it's also big in terms of funding. As we have heard, individual households are the biggest funder in the water sector already. So we're not talking about the World Bank or UNICEF, not even international cooperation together is as big as individual households, even though data is still patchy, but from GLASS reports, we do see these numbers coming up. The third point is that self-supply is key for universal access. We're talking really here about reaching everyone on the planet, and particularly rural areas. They will not be reached by centralized approaches, not in the long run. So we do need complementary approaches, and one of them can be self-supply. And that would be one of the key recommendations for me. First of all, for all of us, open our eyes, look into self-supply, recognize its scale already and its potential in the future, and then integrate it. I'm not asking funders to completely move to self-supply, but to integrate it in their plans and going away from 100% funding to centralized approaches. The final point would be for universal access. We have been talking about universal access for a long time. And if we want to reach that, we do need self-supply. With that, back to you.
Thank you so much, Matthias. A huge topic, many issues, and you've pulled that together beautifully. I'd just like to thank this incredible group of 10 organizations that have pulled the sessions together. A lot of preparation went into it. A huge thanks to the audience as well. And a special thanks to Rainier for all your background work in making sure everything runs so smoothly. And of course, the Pathable team who've been helping us quietly in the background. Here's some self-supply references for you. Have a look, get in touch, and let's keep sharing on this really fascinating topic. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.